Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the True Safety Podcast, and I'm super, super excited this morning because I have a chance to get to know this pretty awesome guy a little bit more in depth. So, Drew Hinton we have this morning, and he is the owner of Aero Safety. And Drew, first of all, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Offline, I was telling you that I have never been this sick in my entire life, and I'm just at the tail end over it. So I'm feeling better. But you were mentioning, so your kids have something a little bit.
Yeah, they pass it around. So I don't know what they have, but like you said, we even threw out the word flu, and I was like, what's that? Like we haven't heard that word in 2 years.
I know, that's no joke. Yeah, everyone was really convinced that I had COVID, and I got tested, and over again I was negative. So I don't know what it is, but I'm starting to feel a little bit better. But I was recently in a podcast with Drew about a few weeks ago, and it was cool. Him and I kind of collaborated on a podcast talking about training, but I'm just super interested. Since then, I've been following you on social and just been seeing what your company is up to with your training and your technical training. And you guys do so much. And I just wanted to first, before I dive into that, I want to take a step back and get to know you a little bit better as far as how in the world did you get into safety? How did you get into this line of work? Take us from the beginning. Who are you?
So my background prior to safety is fire department. I was a full-time career firefighter, EMT, and hazmat officer in Louisville, Kentucky for 10 years. And so that's where I got a lot of my skills, but I wanted to get into the prevention side. I mean, being in Louisville, Kentucky, in a metro city, we saw a lot of stuff, more than, routine calls and calls that you don't want to see again. Right. Mm-hmm. So it actually started out, I was looking for a second job because most firefighters they work 1 day on, 2 days off. So we'll have a second job or even third job. And so actually my captain at the time said, hey, there's a consulting firm that was in Louisville, and the owner was a former fire chief, and he had a bunch of fire department members on his staff. And he said, why don't you go try out for him? And, he can use you for, all the technical things that we're doing in the fire department, confined space, hazmat, CPR. And so I did, and kind of started doing just small things, and it worked out well. And I kind of developed my passion for the prevention side. Like I said, seeing a lot of things happen after the fact, and after safety doesn't work or the employee doesn't use safety properly. And so I kind of went with it, went back and got my degree, and it's been smooth sailing ever since. And I've been fortunate enough to be in a lot of different industries, and the company's been doing well. And, I enjoy the prevention side. I don't miss, the fire department career as much as I enjoy what I'm doing now. So,
Yeah.
but it did play a big factor in just having those skills. And like I said, wanting to be in the preventative measure side.
Oh my gosh, I just respect so much what you did. And we worked with a firefighter and EMT as well. And I'll tell you, he taught some of the best first aid CPR AED classes that I've ever been through. I mean, just because of the real life experience, right? And so I'm sure I could only imagine how incredible your classes are, having been able to share the stories and share some of the things that you went through. And so I'm just curious. I mean, while you're working at the department, did you respond to a lot of job site? I mean, it sounded like you did respond to, a few job site, I'm sure many, but what were some of I'm just curious, safety person to safety person. This is what I would want to ask you is like, what are some of the things that maybe will never leave your memory when it comes to like workplace accidents that you saw?
I mean, we responded to a few. One of the departments I was on in Louisville, because we had several stations. One of the stations I was at was responsible for all the technical rescue. So we would call out to machinery incidents where people's arms or legs are caught in pieces of machinery, and kind of gets pretty gruesome. But my background is hazmat. I was on the hazmat engine for most of my career, and so I've got some some stories on that, and even like this past week, I was teaching a hazmat class, and
Yeah.
the customer had hydrofluoric acid, and I always tell people that deal with that or know what it is, about an incident we made that this facility in our fire district's idea of letting the fire department know that there was a hydrofluoric acid or an HF leak was to pull the fire alarm, pull the pull station. And so they don't understand that we get dispatched as a commercial fire alarm, showing
Yeah.
up thinking there's a building on fire, and then we get there and there was people outside like burning and chemical burns, screaming, and we're like, this isn't what we got dispatched for.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And how common, I mean, how common, not so much that incident, but how common is it that employers are not trained in sort of the incident management, or, how to properly develop a relationship with your local fire department too, just to let them know, hey, this is what we're up to. This is what we do. I often
Right.
see that that's missed, especially in small towns.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, just how important that is to let your fire department know what you're up to and what you do if you have hazards on the job like that, working with chemicals.
Right.
Oh,
And
my
there's
goodness.
been several times. I'll be the first one to tell people that not all the time you want to wait on the fire department. I mean, sometimes you have a good relationship with them, and they're capable of doing the response that you need, whether it's hazmat or confined space or just medical, whatever that may be. But I'll be the first one to tell everybody, most of the time you don't want to wait on them because they may be called
Wow.
out somewhere else, or maybe they're not capable of doing it. I mean, just because they're staff doesn't mean that they are, hazmat technicians or confined space rescue trained and have the equipment, so on and so forth.
Hmm. What do you recommend that employers do? I mean, the students that come through your classes, let's say, and they're taking, maybe a HAZWOPER class with you, but they're maybe developing their program. It's the first time that they've taken the training. What do you recommend? Do you recommend that, first and foremost, that companies are establishing a relationship with their local fire department, really designating, points of contact that way, or what are some pieces of advice that you give students that come through your class?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And definitely, even if you do establish an in-house rescue team or HAZWOPER team, however you want to refer to that as, you always establish your contacts and a good relationship with the fire department, because at the end of the day, they're going to respond at some capacity. Maybe they take over and they're trained and they're a fully staffed professional department, or if they're volunteer, it may take a little bit longer to get there. Maybe they still have training and capabilities to do that, but at least bring them in to look at your hazards. Because one of the safety jobs I had prior to consulting was I was a global safety manager for a chemical manufacturer in Indiana. And so I brought in the local departments to tour our facility to do some pre-planning to make sure that they're aware. And some of them joked around and said, if you all have a leak, we're calling in sick because of the stuff that we had.
I believe it. They're like, it's funny you say that. I was a health and safety director for an oil and gas / construction company. We had like a fab shop, manufacturing shop, and a trucking division. But anyways, we brought out our local fire department to do the same thing. Just look at our hazards, just, have a meet and greet. We were just establishing emergency response plans, and they were like, in case of an emergency, like, we don't have the proper rescue for the confined space. Some of the guys were fabbing on these unique tanks, and they noticed that, and they were like, well, in case of a confined space incident, they're like, we don't have the equipment. Like, it was such a small town. They're like, we don't have that. So
And
dot.
yeah, I mean, it did help me from my standpoint. At the time, they didn't have, the chemical manufacturer I worked at did not have a hazmat team. And so that kind of helped my case of, hey, let's build our own internally. We're still going to rely on them. And so the goal, and so we incorporated it with them into the fire department, into our training still. We did our first couple of years of, hey, let's get established. Let's make sure we're comfortable with each other. And then year 3 that I was there, we were calling the fire department, hey, you come out here and do a tabletop exercise with us, or let's run a full scenario to where we started out and then you all come in and take over, so we can get that incident command system kind of meshing together from both sides.
Absolutely.
But they don't get, hands-on training, realistic as much as most people think. They train in a classroom a lot of times just like we do in the safety field. And so anytime that you can say, hey, you want to come out here and do some training with us, I mean, most of the time they'll be all over it.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I heard that. I heard that too with some of the fire department. Well, first of all, since it was a small town, they were like, first of all, a lot of us are volunteer. Like we have very few people full time on our staff. And that was an eye opener. I mean, I just didn't know that was this. I just didn't know. I had never developed a relationship with the local fire department before. And they were like, so yeah, I mean, we have, a handful of full-time team members and we don't get training ourselves as much. They were actually like, oh, you offer H2S training. Can we take that from you? And I was like, oh yeah, geez, for sure. And that was a big thing. Like oil and gas was just booming in this town. And so H2S was something that they were really interested in taking classes on. So
that's good. That's good.
So what are some of your favorite classes to teach? I have an assumption, but I want to know, what do you love? What do you love?
I mean, hazmat's always my favorite just because of my background, but I do enjoy the confined space, but also medical, just CPR, first aid. And then we occasionally do like we've done a few 40-hour emergency medical responder courses.
Okay.
They take like a more or less an advanced in-house first responder team. But I like doing that one because when you can probably relate, there's a lot of things that you see more fruit from that class than others. I mean, yeah, I can respond to a chemical leak, but the CPR and first aid goes outside the workplace. And so it applies to so many different aspects. And they're, I'll certify them in most of the time I certify them in adults CPR first aid, but I'll still cover children, infants, because, I've got 3 kids myself. We've got kids at home. Most of the time it doesn't occur in the workplace. You're doing CPR in the house, out in public, somewhere it may be.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And when teaching these classes, is it something that, especially the 40-hour classes where you have a little bit more freedom and leeway to add in your own spin and flavor to a class? Like, what do you love incorporating in all of your classes? I mean, from looking at the company's Instagram and just seeing social, like the hands-on piece is huge for you guys. And it looks like you guys are subject matter experts, at these classes and doing really technical work with training. So what is your philosophy around training? And just, tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, our ultimate goal is to make everything as site specific as possible. We do have some things that I guess I'm using air quotes here, cookie cutter things that, we've got at CAN. It's kind of just a short class maybe, but when you get to the more technical and longer courses, we'll typically work with the customer and the client weeks ahead of time or months ahead of time and try to figure out what's your biggest hazards. And then we'll ask them for their emergency action plans. Hey, send me pictures of this so that when we're doing the classroom portion, we're still showing pictures of their stuff. And then we go out there and use their equipment. And we have our own, training simulators. We've got, a HazSim training device that we use to simulate air monitoring readings rather than just saying, okay, here's a piece of paper that says you're getting 10 ppm of H2S, whatever that may be. And so we can kind of give them a more realistic feeling on that. But like you said, we do a lot of the hands-on is really where they enjoy it, right? So, I mean, there's only so much we can sit in a classroom, but sometimes we have to do that. But they really enjoy seeing things that they're going to be focusing on. I don't want to train them on, how to respond to a tanker being turned over if they're not doing anything with tankers, right? So I want to make sure that they're familiar with their equipment and their hazards they're going to be using on a daily basis or facing on a daily basis. And then, of course, we'll cover other stuff as well. But we want to make sure that this is what you're doing on a daily basis. This is what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, I love that philosophy. I mean, just as site specific as possible and showing them in real time, real life. This is your pieces of equipment. This is your, your job sites, having pictures and things like that to kind of bring to life the training. So that's awesome. That makes me think, with everything going on in 2022 already, I mean, everything that we're dealing with even last year, just some of the trends, how do you really see safety evolving this next year or safety training? Do you have Yeah, just like what's your philosophy around it all? I mean, do you see the same training topics maybe as you did last year, or have you been training on other things? Has there been any like specific company requests for different topics? How have you really seen safety trending?
Yeah, I think we're starting to slowly see more and more people bring in. I mean, you and I both outside consultants and outside training services, because compared to early 2020 when COVID first hit, it was just to shut everything down. Nobody comes into the facility. We don't really know what to do. But now that I'm using this term loosely, somewhat got a grasp of COVID, they've already got, for the most part, measures in place so they can start bringing those things in and doing those classes that maybe they've been putting off for a year. OSHA came out and said, 2020 that they're going to use discretion, and because of COVID, that if you have to skip, extend the, annual training to, 16 months, 14 months, a little bit longer, that they'll use their discretion because they understand there is COVID. But we're starting to see more and more people asking for those hands-on things where they're getting in more close proximity. I've had one quoted out this past week that we haven't done in a while, but we enjoy doing is a radiation safety officer course. It's usually for me, it's one of the more fun classes. That was kind of one of my specialties within hazmat is radiation and nuclear technology. So it's definitely a fun one, but haven't done that one since pre-COVID. So it's good to be back, getting back and being back in these facilities. And they're, like I said, they're bringing companies like you and I into their facilities, and getting people back into the classroom is the big thing. I mean, I
couldn't agree more with you. That's funny you say that. I feel like I like the way you said that. I feel like a lot of companies, maybe they were just, for whatever reason, pausing classes. Yes, being afraid, or just maybe not feeling comfortable grouping everyone together. Maybe business was just slower and now they're starting to rehire. But for whatever reason it is, I do feel like companies are starting to get their, and also maybe the budgets are fresh in the beginning of the year now, and so they have the budget for training. But companies that haven't done training in a few years, it seems like, are finally starting to say, okay, let's get back to the basics.
Yep. And we've done several customers and clients to where they have a lot of people that need to be trained, and they'll end up breaking it into several small sessions so that we can accommodate everybody, and they still can do their physical distancing and social distancing, and we can sanitize all the equipment in between classes. And so they're still expressing a need, but we're still meeting the end result that we're getting people trained, which is the main.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the True Safety Podcast. Make sure to tune in next week as we dive into part 2 of our discussion with Drew Hinton on the past, present, and future of safety training. It's not something you're going to want to miss. We'll see you next time.